So picture this. You wake up in the middle of the night, maybe you're walking to the kitchen for a glass of water, and you brutally stub your toe on the leg of a wooden chair.
Oh, the worst.
Right, the pain is just searing. And the chair, it's completely unyielding.
Yeah, it doesn't care about your toe at all.
Exactly. And your immediate, undeniable conclusion in that moment is that the physical universe put matter in your way, and you just happen to collide with it. I mean, there's this inherent expectation we all carry that the reality we live in has this absolute solidity to it. Like, the stage is fully set before we ever walk onto it.
Yeah, that's really the default human experience, isn't it? We treat the physical world as the ultimate baseline. We observe it, we measure it, and we just assume we are merely reacting to it.
But when you step into the world of deep philosophical inquiry, that solid wooden chair starts to look, well, a lot less like a fixed law of physics and a lot more like a symptom of something invisible. Because today we are tackling one of the oldest, most foundational existential chicken and egg problems in human history. Does existence determine our consciousness? Or does our consciousness determine our existence?
And this is really the classic watershed divide between materialism and idealism.
Yeah.
Materialism argues that the physical world comes first. So your brain, your environment, these physical things generate and shape your thoughts. Idealism flips that completely. It argues that the mind, your consciousness, is the original source code, and it actively builds the physical world you experience.
Which brings us to the source material we are unpacking today.
Yeah.
It's a really fascinating, sweeping essay titled Consciousness Determines Existence by a writer named Sufeng.
It's quite a read.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the author doesn't just treat this debate as some abstract academic puzzle for, a university lounge. He treats it as the literal mechanical blueprint for how reality is constructed, dictating everything from the layout of our cities to the literal clothes hanging in our closets.
He really does.
Yeah.
And the stakes he establishes right out of the gate are incredibly high. He makes this audacious claim that choosing the wrong side of this debate, basically resigning yourself to being a mere byproduct of your physical environment, actually traps you in a limited, painful reality.
Wow.
Yeah. But if you can grasp his framework, he argues you unlock dimensions of reality you couldn't otherwise even perceive.
But, this entire framework hinges on a rather blunt assumption about human nature right from the start. Before he even attempts to prove his theory, he claims that the answer to this whole mind versus matter debate entirely depends on who is answering the question.
Right, he doesn't think everyone is even equipped to have this conversation.
Exactly. He divides humanity into 5 distinct psychological tiers based on what drives their internal engine.
He essentially builds this hierarchy to explain why materialism feels like an absolute truth to some people, while idealism is just obvious to others.
Right.
At the very base of this hierarchy, he places what he calls ignorant people. And these are individuals driven entirely by raw survival instinct.
This is pure survival.
Yeah. The author posits that if you stranded them on a deserted island, they would perish because they lack the capacity for deep creation or conceptual thinking. They only know how to consume what is physically present. So for them, physical existence isn't just important, it is literally everything.
Right, because without the physical environment actively providing for them, their consciousness has nothing to process. Moving one step up from that, he identifies the laities.
Okay, the ladies.
Yeah, these people operate on desires. The text specifically uses the word seduction, like the seduction of money, status, power, or physical beauty. And without the constant pursuit of these external physical markers, the author argues their lives lose all meaning. Their consciousness is basically just a radar constantly scanning for material acquisition.
Which leads us right to the third tier, the mortals. Mortals are driven by affection and connection, family, friends, colleagues, the nation.
Which sounds nice, right?
It sounds noble. But in Zufeng's framework, it's actually still a trap of materialism. If you strip away these physical and social connections, mortals face this crushing, unbearable loneliness. Their minds just collapse without an external community. So across all 3 of these lower tiers, existence strictly dictates consciousness.
Reading through these tiers, I instantly thought of Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Oh, sure, that makes sense.
Yeah, you start at the bottom with food and shelter, move up to security, then love and belonging. But the implication here feels much more rigid. Is the author suggesting we all naturally progress through these stages as we mature? Or does he view these as permanent lanes that people are just permanently stuck in?
This raises an important question, and it's a critical distinction to make. Zufeng actually views these tiers as deeply entrenched states of being.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He explicitly warns against even attempting to debate the concept of consciousness determining existence with anyone in those lower three tiers. He compares it to casting pearls before swine, noting that they might even give you a back kick for your efforts.
A back kick. Because you are actively threatening the foundation of their reality. Like if someone's entire identity is built on acquiring money or maintaining a specific social circle, telling them that the physical world is just an illusion of the mind is going to sound like complete madness.
Precisely. To them, physical existence absolutely must come first. Therefore, grasping his philosophy requires looking at the top two tiers. The fourth tier consists of the sages.
The scientists and philosophers?
Exactly. They are driven by reason. They look past the surface of phenomena to find the underlying essence. Sages hold existence and consciousness in equal regard. They use the physical world as a laboratory to explore the capabilities of the mind.
But the absolute peak of this pyramid, the fifth tier, belongs to the saints, or immortals. And these individuals are driven purely by spirituality. The author asserts that for this group, the physical senses, what you see, smell, or touch, are entirely secondary.
They don't even matter.
Right. Only spiritual perception holds weight. For them, consciousness undeniably dictates everything. It is a top-down creation process.
The author's underlying point here is that grasping the true mechanics of the universe requires abandoning conventional, survival-based thinking. You have to detach from the instinctual reliance on the physical world.
Which, I mean, sounds incredibly enlightened in theory. It's a beautiful concept. But how does he actually prove this? If I am a skeptic who just stubbed my toe, telling me I need the mindset of an immortal doesn't make my toe hurt any less.
Very true.
The author must know this because he grounds his argument not in some cosmic theory, but in the mundane objects sitting right in front of us.
Yeah, he turns to the evidence of human invention. It is a highly pragmatic method to demonstrate a deeply spiritual concept. He uses everyday items like cars, houses, and clothing as his primary exhibits.
Like, think about the mechanics of a car. A combustion engine didn't just sprout out of the soil. A Victorian house didn't form from tectonic pressure over millions of years. These things did not exist in the natural physical environment.
The logic he employs here is quite difficult to refute. Every single artificial object you interact with, the smartphone in your pocket, the architecture of the building you were sitting in, the chair you stubbed your toe on, every single one began as an invisible, non-physical structure in a human mind.
Yeah.
If humanity lacked this internal consciousness, the physical reality we navigate today would be entirely devoid of these creations. Therefore, the mental blueprint must precede the physical reality.
I have to push back just a little bit here, though. Yes, the architect conceptualizes the house in their mind, but they still have to go out and chop down a physical tree to get the wood.
Right, they need the materials.
They didn't conjure the timber out of thin air with pure thought. The imagination relies on pre-existing physical materials to manipulate.
Right.
How does he reconcile that?
It is a valid counterargument. However, Shuofeng's perspective is that the raw material, the timber or the iron ore, is merely passive potential. A pile of wood sitting in a forest does absolutely nothing. It is entropy.
Okay, I see.
It is only when consciousness imposes a specific imagined geometry onto that wood that it becomes a house. The mental blueprint is the active force. The physical matter is just the obedient medium. Therefore, the structured reality we experience is entirely generated by consciousness.
That reminds me of the old analogy of the sculptor looking at a block of marble and saying, the statue is already inside, they just have to chip away the excess. The form exists in the mind before it exists in the physical space.
That perfectly captures his premise. Consciousness is the architect, and matter is simply the building block.
But proving this mental architecture requires looking beyond individual objects. Like, if a single mind can organize timber into a house, what happens when millions of minds share a single geography? The author scales this concept up from living rooms to entire nations. And to make this leap, he introduces some highly controversial and culturally charged comparisons.
He deliberately uses stark contrast between different cultures and how they manage their environments to argue that collective consciousness shapes geography, rather than the environment shaping the people.
Before we get into this, I want to explicitly pause here for you, the listener. As your guides today, our job is to impartially report the author's exact claims from the text so we can understand the mechanics of his philosophical framework. We aren't endorsing these cultural viewpoints or generalizations, but we absolutely must examine them directly to see how he builds his argument.
Understanding his thesis requires looking at the specific evidence he chooses to deploy.
Right. So let's look at his methodology. He draws on his own observations of residential areas in Zimbabwe over a 10-year period. He contrasts the homes of Caucasians, which he describes as orderly, pristine, with blooming flowers and manicured lawns, against the environments of Chinese people living in the same region, which he describes in harsh terms as messy, greasy, and overgrown with weeds.
And he bolsters this with an anecdote about his son taking a road trip through major American cities like Washington, D.C. and New York.
Oh, right.
When asked for his impressions, the son reported that New York's Chinatown was jarringly dirty and disorganized, failing to match the prosperity of the broader city around it.
And the author takes these isolated observations and constructs a massive hypothetical scenario. He poses a thought experiment. Imagine swapping the entire Chinese population with the populations of Japan and Germany for 50 years.
Okay.
He asserts that within that time frame, the physical geography of China would transform into a beautifully graceful landscape, while the territories of Japan and Germany would degrade into disorder and messiness.
Now, from a purely analytical standpoint, he is making a massive logical leap here. He completely bypasses historical infrastructure, economic disparity, zoning laws, or resource distribution.
Yeah, completely ignores all of it.
He attributes the state of the physical environment strictly to the collective mind of the people living there.
But why? Why ignore all those obvious factors?
Because doing so serves his philosophical utility. He is systematically trying to destroy the existence determines consciousness argument. The standard materialistic view assumes that if you place a person in a prosperous, well-maintained environment like New York City, the physical environment will imprint upon their mind and they will naturally become orderly.
It's like assuming if you install a new piece of hardware, the computer will automatically run faster regardless of the software.
Exactly the right analogy. The author argues that this environmental imprinting doesn't actually happen. When people move into a beautiful space, the space often shifts to reflect their internal state. He concludes that if physical surroundings truly dictated our thoughts, anyone moving to a nice city would instantly adopt its traits.
But they don't, according to him.
Right. Because they often maintain their previous habits, he deduces that internal consciousness is the true overriding architect. A specific collective mind generates a specific physical environment. The mind is the operating system. The city is merely the monitor displaying the output.
It is a sweeping way to interpret human geography. And if collective consciousness dictates the state of our neighborhoods, the author believes it also dictates the macro-level architecture of entire eras. Like, he argues that history, biology, and global politics are all downstream from thought.
The sheer breadth of phenomena he claims as evidence is expansive. He applies this lens to urban planning, contrasting Harare, the capital of Zimbabwe, with Beijing.
Yeah, he observes that in Harare, commercial, industrial, and residential zones are strictly compartmentalized, separated by significant distance. Meanwhile, in Beijing, these zones are deeply intertwined, with shops, factories, and homes just tangled together.
And he doesn't credit this to available landmass or economic history. He attributes it entirely to a fundamental difference between British and Chinese consciousness regarding how human space should be organized.
He even extends this same logic to intellectual and scientific achievements. He questions why Americans consistently win Nobel Prizes while mainland China historically has not, and he distills this complex geopolitical question into a folksy analogy stating, if you want a burger, you won't make noodles.
The intent dictates the outcome. If a society's collective consciousness isn't aimed at the specific type of disruptive innovation that Nobel committees reward, they simply won't produce it, regardless of funding or resources.
He even filters demographics and political systems through this theory. Why do educated populations tend to have fewer children? Why do some nations codify monogamy while others practice polygamy? Why is the U.S. presidency restricted to 2 terms while other global leaders rule indefinitely?
For Shuifeng, none of this is the result of historical happenstance or economic pressure. It is the direct, physical manifestation of a nation's collective consciousness solidifying into law and biology.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because the most vivid illustration he uses to prove that an era is actually just a mental state is his examination of the Chinese Cultural Revolution. He uses fashion as a physical proxy for the mind.
It's an incredibly potent example of how an invisible thought process physically constricts the material world.
During the Cultural Revolution, the author notes that women were forced into a state of physical muting. They wore drab colors, yellow, gray, blue. But it went beyond color. They had to physically bind their breasts tightly to their chests. Yeah, they were forbidden from wearing skirts or makeup. All of this was enforced to avoid being labeled what the text translates as a hot, foxy spirit, which was a derogatory term for someone displaying individuality or trying to attract attention.
Consider the implications of that. The physical geography of China had not altered. The biological anatomy of the women was identical to the generations before and after them. Material existence had not shifted in any way that required that specific restrictive fashion.
The only thing that changed was the invisible consciousness of the era. The collective mind shifted toward conformity and fear, and the physical reality of how millions of human bodies were presented completely transformed.
Bro.
Fast forward to today, and the author marvels at how women dress freely and beautifully, describing them as fairies descending to Earth. The environment didn't free them, the collective mind shifted, and the physical reality immediately followed suit.
It is a compelling argument that an era is not defined by the passage of time on a calendar, but by the prevailing consciousness that writes the physical rules of that period.
So if the collective consciousness dictates the reality of an entire era, how does an individual operate within that massive mental structure? Like, do you have any agency at all? To answer that, the author scales all the way back down from global history to a single college student.
The essay transitions into a deeply personal narrative here.
He references an article he read that was actively criticizing the modern generation of single-child students in China for being delusional. The article highlighted a student who shared his ultimate life plan. I want to move to the U.S., build a villa in a small city with beautiful mountains, have a green lawn, a private pool, and drive a Mercedes-Benz.
And the original reviewer of this student's plan mocked him mercilessly. The advice given was to grow up, be realistic, and stop indulging in wishful thinking. Basically, look at the physical reality currently in front of you and adjust your expectations downward.
Shuefeng's reaction to this reviewer is absolute fury. He calls the reviewer a frog at the bottom of a well. It's a classic idiom describing someone with an incredibly confined worldview. He says this reviewer's vision of the sky is only as big as a sieve.
But he goes much further than calling the reviewer narrow-minded. He classifies this realistic advice as actively evil.
Evil.
Yes, because by demanding a young person conform to their current physical circumstances, you are maliciously oppressing their spirituality. You are forcing them to accept the false premise that existence determines consciousness.
If you only ever react to what already exists around you, you are functionally a non-player character in your own life. You can never generate anything new. You are trapped in the code that is already written.
Which is why Shuefeng offers his own direct advice to the student. Visualize it, your wish will come true. The clarity of the picture in your mind dictates the probability of its physical realization. He uses the phrase, you cannot walk west if your mind wants to go east. Your physical behavior, and ultimately your physical reality, is entirely tethered to your conscious intent.
I find that fascinating, but also a bit jarring. Isn't it slightly dangerous to peddle the idea that if you just imagine a Mercedes hard enough, it will materialize in your driveway? That sounds a lot like the pop psychology law of attraction, which often leaves people frustrated when their thoughts don't instantly yield a luxury car.
It's a vital critique. But Shuefeng isn't talking about passive wishing. He isn't saying you sit on a couch, picture a car, and wait for it to spawn. He is arguing a mechanical process.
Okay, a process.
If your consciousness is entirely consumed by a specific geometric reality, the villa, the pool, your mind will relentlessly arrange the passive matter of your life, meaning your actions, your labor, your decisions, until that reality is constructed. The imagination is the engine, but you still have to drive the vehicle.
So the mind organizes the chaos. So what does this all mean? This brings us to the ultimate crescendo of the essay. We've journeyed through houses and fashion and the dreams of a college student. But at the very end of the text, the author takes this massive cosmic leap. The stakes suddenly expand beyond anything we've discussed so far.
He lays out the final, universal consequences of this philosophical debate. If you truly believe, in your core, that existence determines consciousness, you are aligning your existence with that of flora and fauna.
You're just a plant or an animal.
Exactly. You are trapped in basic animal instinct. You are confined to the physical limitations of a single Earth, living a brief span merely waiting to die. You remain a passive observer in a reality you believe you cannot control.
But what if you grasp the alternative? If you truly internalize that your mind is the architect of reality, the author claims you adopt the thinking of gods and Buddhas. And the reward isn't just a better house or a nicer car. The mechanism of mastering your consciousness allows you to unlock 36-dimensional spaces.
The logic here is profound within his framework. If mind creates matter, then a mind that fully understands its own power is no longer bound by the physics of this specific dimension.
It breaks the rules.
Yes, you gain the capacity to decipher the mysteries of the universe, extending your existence into infinite time and space. You die in one physical form, only to dictate the terms of your rebirth in another.
It is the ultimate promise of unconventional thinking. Conventional, materialistic thought keeps you surviving within the contradictions and pain of this specific reality. Unconventional thought, the absolute knowing that consciousness is supreme, gives you the keys to transcend the physical simulation entirely.
It forces a complete reframing of how you interact with the world around you.
It really does. We started this deep dive looking at the 5 tiers of humanity, exploring why some people are crushed by the loss of physical connection, while others seek pure spiritual truth. We analyze the invisible mental blueprints required to build something as simple as a car or a house.
We examine the controversial premise that the cleanliness or disorder of geography is a direct reflection of a culture's collective mind, dismantling the idea that a good environment automatically makes a good person.
We saw how the architecture of entire societies, from political term limits to the tightly bound fashion of the Cultural Revolution, is entirely dictated by collective thought. And it all culminated in a college student dreaming of a villa and a philosopher explaining that mastering that imagination is the key to breaking out of this dimension entirely.
It leaves us with a rather profound implication to consider.
Yeah.
If the author is right, and our collective consciousness built the intricate, solid reality we're sitting in right now, what happens to our physical reality if that collective consciousness is abruptly altered?
That's a staggering thought.
Think about the mechanics of it. If a sudden global event or a massive technological leap like artificial intelligence instantly and fundamentally changes how human beings process information and conceive of the world, how fast does the architecture of our current reality collapse? And how violently does it reform to match our new collective mind?
Wow. The next time you wake up in the dark and stub your toe on that unyielding wooden chair, maybe take a second before you curse the universe. Ask yourself what part of the collective mind put that chair there in the first place. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the physical world around you and keep exploring the dimensions of your own consciousness.